welcome back, our followers in YouTube channel. Hope you are well. In the topic this week, we are going to talk with Professor Martin Glen. He is professor at the University of, you said, Professor?
Radford University.
Radford University, yes, indeed. So how are you, Professor?
I'm very good, thank you. Good to be here this morning.
Thank you for receiving our invitation and being here with us today. This is a great day for us. We're talking about philosophy. So, okay, we're going to start with the first question, Professor. What is philosophy?
It's not an easy thing to define because philosophy is our human way of addressing the whole of our human situation. And therefore, it's the largest discipline of all the disciplines, larger than anthropology or physical science and so on. It includes the scientific knowledge, but it transcends them. And so philosophy asks the question, what does it mean to be human? And what are the dimensions of being human? The dimension of knowledge, for example. What are the limits of knowledge? How should we be living our lives? Which is the questions of ethics. You know, what do we do? What is right and wrong? And it also asks the ultimate question about what is real. What is real about the universe? What is real about us? And of course, how we live our lives is related to what we take to be reality, right? So philosophy encompasses the whole of our human situation in that way.
So, haven't philosophy yet defined or answered to those questions?
How does it answer those questions?
No, haven't philosophy yet answered to those questions that arise?
Well, yes and no, right? If you look at the history of philosophy, which in the Indian tradition is probably the oldest tradition, going back to the Vedas. In the West, it goes back to the pre-Socratics and Plato and Aristotle. Philosophers have always been attempting to address those questions, but there is a dynamic going on throughout history, and that is that human beings are growing in their understanding of the universe by developing science and progressing science and so on. And we're growing in our understanding of the human situation, the nature of religion, the nature of what a human being is. So we're part, this whole effort going back to the ancient world is part of an ongoing process of growth of our humanity and civilization. And that's why these questions can't be answered in a final way. They're always part of a project, a human project that we're all involved in.
Okay, I understand. But shouldn't that be, let's see, if philosophy doesn't have an answer, a definite answer on that question, is it not good for new followers or new philosophers? What do you say about that?
See, the key thing here, I think, is that there are depths and dimensions to the universe and to our existence which are beyond immediate knowledge and beyond science. So how do we access those dimensions and those depths? In any particular time in history, philosophers can do this. Plotinus in the 4th century of the Western world he said, I have experienced the whole, the one, right? He is moved to a state of consciousness that is beyond ordinary knowledge and ordinary science. And this can be done at any time in history because so all of us are engaged in this attempt to live our lives the best way possible and find out how to live our lives. And that includes our developing our ability to access these dimensions that are beyond the limited role of science. We need to include science, but we need to go beyond it. And it's possible for any person, any time, to be thoughtful and meditative and open to these dimensions that are life transforming.
Okay, you talk about science. What is the relationship between philosophy and science?
Well, philosophy gave birth to science in the sense of the scientific method, right? The original science, going back to the ancient world, was the philosophers who were attempting to understand human knowledge and accumulate human knowledge. But in the 17th century, Galileo and others discovered the scientific method. And it's a systematic way to use empirical methods in connection with experiments to come to an understanding of the mathematically defined laws that constitute our universe. So it is absolutely essential for philosophers to know about these results of science. They're not just speculation, they're real knowledge that develops over time. That's why we can fly airplanes and all the rest of it now. But nevertheless, science does not exhaust philosophy because of what I was saying earlier. There are dimensions of our human existence, the spiritual dimension, the so-called depth dimensions, which are beyond science, and a philosopher needs to deal with the whole of our situation, with all of those dimensions. Okay, so if philosophy gave birth to science, and science got, it is systematized in process to define reality or to understand reality. Can philosophy do that? What do you think about? Have you heard about Dr. Fidel Gutierrez? Once more, his name is?
The philosopher is Fidel Gutierrez. Have you heard?
Yes.
He's trying to do something like this, like to systematize philosophy to understand reality the way science does. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that all those kinds of endeavors, if they're done with real wisdom and real understanding, are excellent. Philosophy is capable of many dimensions, and we need people exploring the dimensions of human existence in all sorts of ways. Emmanuel Levinas in France explored the infinity that he said was there in the human being, right? So he's exploring that dimension, and other philosophers can explore other dimensions. I think those endeavors are great. They're wonderful. Great. So,
do you believe that modern society has lost interest in philosophy?
Definitely. There's been since they invented the mass media, which was back in the First World War, about that time, 1914, 1915, the mass media have been dominated by forces of capitalism, that is, the big corporations who have an interest in making people into consumers and people concerned with their little existence and their immediate existence, and the big questions of life are not economically valuable to the mass media, and therefore what many thinkers have concluded that mass human beings since the early 20th century have become what they call one-dimensional. Herbert Marcuse used that phrase. We have a one-dimensional society in which the depth of dimensions of society and the possibilities of alternative, more humane, more intelligent societies are systematically buried among people. Okay. And also the electronic revolution that we have experienced in the last 20 or 30 years gives us this constant attention. Everybody's looking at their cell phone in every, in every bus stop. People are all, and this constant electronic stimulation of one moment to the next obliterates those depth dimensions as well. So I think people have lost interest in philosophy, and yet philosophy is essential to to a decent future for human beings on this planet, I think.
You have said a lot of things that are really interesting to me. That I've seen on the internet, if you look for any philosophy channel, you're going to see that they have thousands or millions of followers. That is something really interesting, because it means that people are seeking out for philosophy. Now, you said something earlier that maybe science that get results with the method, the scientific method, is something why people prefer science instead of philosophy, even though that science comes from philosophy. Now, maybe if we can see that people are seeking out for philosophy, do you think that maybe if philosophy get results into these questions that you say, maybe can this awaken interest in philosophy for people?
There's possibilities there, right? And as you point out, that people are seeking meaning. They're seeking some sort of, partly because we human beings are so threatened with nuclear holocausts and climate collapse and tyrannies of all sorts across the world. People are seeking something else, and that something else would have to include philosophy in the sense of a thoughtful, attentive, and mature thing. And I think that's the key, that human beings are looking for moving to another stage of maturity, which I call world-centric. We're realizing that we're part of one civilization on this planet. We're one human race, full of a wonderful diversity, but we're all the same. We have one little planet to live on with one biosphere, which is being destroyed right now. And so we need to be thinking in terms of moving to a world which is united. And in my view, there's an Earth Constitution, the Constitution for the Federation of Earth, which is a key to uniting under that unity and diversity. But that represents a higher stage of maturity. People need to be thinking, why am I ethnocentric? Why do I defend this nation versus that nation? Why do I identify with this race versus that race, or with my gender, and so on? We need to be thinking as human beings, and if we start really thinking as human beings without those boundaries and those divisions, then we will have reached another stage of maturity, which is what philosophy points us toward.
Okay, Professor, tell our followers a little bit about this federal Constitution. Sorry, the federal. You said, what's the name?
The Constitution for the Federation of Earth.
Federation of Earth. Yeah, tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it is a constitution that was written by hundreds of world citizens during the late 20th century. And it is now available online on the internet, www.earth-constitution.org. What it does is create for human beings a world parliament. And that world parliament arises from the grassroots of 1,000 electoral districts around the world, so that everybody on Earth gets to vote to put someone in the world parliament. And this world parliament's job I think this is the key thing. Their function under the Earth Constitution is the common good of humanity, not the common good of Russia or China or the United States, but the common good of humanity, which means, it's right there in Article 1 of the Constitution, it means ending war, for protecting human rights worldwide, protecting the global environment, and eventually eliminating this terrible poverty versus wealth that we have in the world, making everybody have a decent standard of living. So those are global issues that no nation or group of nations can attain or achieve. It has to be a world parliament. And so I happen to be president of that organization, the World Constitution and Parliament Association, that promotes the Earth Constitution as I was saying earlier, as a higher stage of human maturity. When we finally grow up on this planet, we will realize that we're one planet and we need to be governing ourselves democratically as one planet.
So you're preparing the path. So when that comes, that time comes, you are ready to go.
That's right, and you can be part of the path by going to our website and signing the Constitution and so on. I
will. You can bet on it. Yeah. And how can you think this differ from the United Nations, for example?
Well, the United Nations is a treaty. It's not a government, right? It's a treaty of sovereign nations. All the sovereign nations are there in the General Assembly, and as you know, the United Nations is controlled by the Security Council with 5 permanent nations that have a veto over everything it does. The United Nations has no authority to legislate laws for the common good of the earth and to enforce those laws.
Okay.
The UN Charter is a charter of sovereign nations. The Earth Constitution is a constitution for governing the earth. It sets up a world judiciary, a world executive branch, a world police, and a world ombudsman to protect human rights, right? So the UN is not a government, and it never was intended to be a government. And that's why it has failed to protect the environment. It has failed to stop war or protect human rights. It has no way to enforce international laws and so on. So what we need to do is not abolish all the UN, because it has many good agencies like the World Health Organization, but to replace the UN Charter with a real constitution that gives us real, effective democratic world government.
And what's the plan for the countries to adopt this constitution of the Federation of Earth?
The plan has to be a democratic ratification of the Constitution, and that is the criteria for that ratification is defined in Article 17. Any constitution will have one article that says how is this going to be ratified and made official. So if you go to Article 17 of the Constitution, you'll see that there are 3 stages of operation, and it defines the ways that governments and people can vote and ratify it and bring it into authority in the world.
Okay, so all of this is possible just because philosophy.
Well, yeah, you know, it may be in the sense that philosophy encompasses the whole.
Okay.
What we're discovering, what science has discovered, and social sciences and hard sciences have discovered in the modern world, is the holism of the universe and the holism of human beings. We're all the same, and the holism of our planetary biosphere. So philosophy, at the very least, is completely compatible with that holism that's been discovered.
Oh, that's great, because what tells us is that philosophy, it is important for political decisions or state decisions. Yes. To unite humanity into a whole, as you said, and to improve relationship between humans. So that's the main idea I receive, and I would like our followers to receive. So to end this interview, I have a final question.
Okay.
we all know, we already spoke about what philosophy is, how can philosophy help improve our way of living or to improve human relationship. But right now, there are threats in our world. If you turn on the television, you turn on your PC, your computer, you're going to see threats everywhere. I have just received, I have received many of these videos, at least in some countries, that people are killing other people and they're recording that it is a sport. I'm going to kill him and we're doing, that's fun. And people apparently like this type of things. So there are threats in our daily lives. What can you say to our followers? How can they reach out philosophy right now? And how can this understanding of philosophy help them to eliminate these threats in their daily lives?
That's a big question. Philosophy includes a dimension of developing a critical understanding of society. Right? If we want to pacify the world that we live in and pacify the threats to our daily lives, we need to critically understand how contemporary society generates terror, generates threats, generates violence. And we need to look beneath the surface of global capitalism, which has vast economic interests in war. Right? We have a military-industrial complex that makes billions of dollars in profit from war and fighting terrorism and so on. We need to develop the critical capacity to look beneath these and see how these things really work. And you're not going to hear that from our politicians because they're representatives of this system. And the same with the nation-state system as capitalism. We have to look at the nation-state system and see how it generates war. As long as you have these absolute boundaries and these walls developed everywhere and saying, oh, we're afraid of Mexicans coming here, or we're afraid of Russians doing this or that to us, we've got a system that generates this danger and this terror. So what we've got to do is change the system as a whole. If we really want to pacify our existence, we've got to be thinking critically with a critical social philosophy that begins to understand how we can transform this system to unite as a whole, as human beings as a whole. And that's what the Earth Constitution does that I was talking about a few moments ago. Okay,
so the answer is go and read the Earth Constitution so you can have a clear path about how you can evolve and improve your thinking, right?
Yes. Start thinking critically and look at the Earth Constitution.
Great. That is a great answer, and it is a key for people to reach out philosophy and start understanding the human capacity. I think that the problem is that people doesn't understand and doesn't know about human capacity, and well, the gift we receive, the reasoning, we use it because all of us use it, but in a wrong manner. So well, of course, this leads us to self-destruction. Self-destruction leads us to destruction of societies and nations as a whole. Well, Professor Glen, thank you very much for being here with us. And our followers, please don't stop following us in our social media and keep in touch with all the content we have about this interesting topic of what philosophy is. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.